Hello, and welcome to the Paradox Podcast, the podcast about the business of the video games industry with me, Shamster Johnny, Chief Business Development Officer at Paradox, and today I'm joined by Ebba Ljungerud, our CEO. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
Hello. This is the podcast where we try to shed a little bit more light on the inner workings and the business side of the video games industry.
You know I've been a guest before. You
I know.
might remember.
I am not saying this for your benefit. This is actually for the benefit of our two listeners, Steve
Yes.
and John, who are listening. Okay, so Ebba, you've been on the podcast once before. You kind of know how it works. The topic for today is kind of a catch-up, mid-season, and ask you a bunch of questions.
Okay.
We've gathered some questions from the community. Some are more hard-hitting than others, so we'll see how the editing works for this. But as always,
Let's aim for no editing and see how that goes.
Let's see how it goes. Let's start with the usual question, which is, what have you been playing?
Okay, so today, actually, I've been playing Fall Guys for 2 hours. We have a book club in the management team, and that book club has been expanded to a book and games club. So today, the whole management team of Paradox played Fall Guys for 2 hours, and we were screaming and shouting, and I have to say, all in all, like, depressingly bad.
No, it was really bad.
Kim was the best, right?
Kim was good. Alexander, our CFO.
Alexander was very good. Shockingly good.
Shockingly good. We had some.
I managed to get past only one of the trails.
But it was fun to see your
Almost
progression as a gamer. You started playing and said, these controls suck. I need a gamepad. Like, I want a gamepad. So that was good. And we also had some people playing with a broken arm.
Yes, that was very impressive.
But
Carlotta.
it is.
No, but I have to say, I think it's a really fun game. I've actually been playing it a bit by myself since
privately as well.
Since it came out. It was the game I played pre-CK3 launch.
Pre-CK3 launch.
And it's, it really drags you in and it keeps you going.
I think Mediatonic has done a really good job of
too.
it. Every time I play it, I have a great amount of fun, but I wish I had a time machine and could jump 1 year into the future and see what they've done with the game modes and iterations, because it feels, even though it's good, it feels like it has so much more to give as they refine the format and get into it. But it's a fun game, and we were just discussing what we're going to play next time.
Yeah, Stellaris, I think, was
we're
the
leaning
choice.
towards Stellaris. We've played CK before launch. We played that for a little bit.
And the other one we were talking about was Mario Kart.
Mario Kart as well, exactly. So it's good for our listeners to understand that not everyone in the management team spends 5 hours a day on their spare time playing games. So it's good for us to.
And I have to say, it's also a really fun thing to do together.
It's team building. It's team building.
The CK3 episode was great. Everyone turned into albinos and carnivores and cannibals.
And do you have anything else lined up in terms of gaming? Have you played anything else?
I've been playing cities quite a bit, and also
Pooh City.
Pooh City, yes. Yeah. I know. I'm terrible.
Like you can't connect the sewer to the main water line. Like, you have to keep them separate.
With the sewer. No, but yeah. My problem is that I don't really have a gaming computer at home.
Yeah.
And that always it becomes a big obstacle for me.
Yeah.
But then now with so I'm actually a big fan of the cloud gaming solutions. I think I'm the perfect customer for
I agree 100%.
So now it's much easier because now I can play.
So which one of the services are you going to go for?
Well, now it's GeForce.
Because City Skylines is actually out on multiple cloud gaming services.
I know.
And not by our doing, but
no, exactly. We've had nothing to do with it. No, but it's but for me that makes a huge difference because it just makes it a lot easier for me.
Okay, cool. I think that's it. I've also been playing Fall Guys.
Sorry, I didn't ask. What have you been playing?
No, but I've been playing Fall Guys with my daughter or with the management team. That's it's the full spectrum of gaming for me right now, Fall Guys. But I'm having a ton of fun with it. And I threw my controller twice today. So it's
that's not a bad
it's not a bad thing. Cool. Let's get the show on the road.
Yes. Shoot.
Let's start with some big questions right away. One of the questions we have, because ultimately Paradox, one thing that has been constant for Paradox ever since its start and continues to be, is our growth.
Yes.
And it's a big, not only, I would say it's a big part of our DNA at this point to kind of have this continued focus on growth. So one of the first questions is, and I think we can open up a business discussion about this, like how do we reconcile, and how do you reconcile the ambition to grow and broaden our audience versus the niche depth of our games? How do you strike a balance between accessibility and complexity and maintaining growth in that kind of?
So I think I've said this before, but one of the first questions I got when it was like announced that I was going to take on this job was like, "You're not really a hardcore gamer. How can you take on the most hardcore gaming company of them all?" And I do think it has something to do with this question, that we never ever want to become less hardcore. We always want to be deep and complex and endless. But that doesn't mean the same for every game. And I think if we talk about where we come from, so the PDS games, like grand strategy games, the ambition is, of course, never to make them easier or less endless. It is, however, the ambition to make them easier to get into if you're a new player. And I think Crusader Kings 3 has done a really good job of that. And we've gotten a lot of new players who are enjoying it, but also I would say many of our old players are not too annoyed with the fact that you don't have to spend 6 hours going through menus before you make your first move. Because you can also choose to do that if you want to. So that's, of course, a very big part of the ambition. Then we have other types of games that are slightly easier to get into. I think most of our games are pretty difficult, in all honesty. But it is very much about, like, what is this when you open the game? What do you see? How do you interact? We talk a lot about things like loading screens. Are they inviting or are they boring? So it can be small things like that as well. So it's not about becoming not endless and deep and complex. It's more about what's the journey into that.
I think what we're also realizing is that, if we can push back on the question, is that the assumption that we have to do something different in order to be really big. And we're maybe proving out that it's not like, I think CK3 is proving that we can be much, much bigger than we ever, not that we ever imagined, but there's been this specter of like, we have to do something different to become that big. And we might get there anyway.
I've been with Paradox since 2014, right? So the constant discussion has been like, how big can a grand strategy game be? And when I started, I mean, it's not that long ago, it was maybe a third of what we think today. So it's also the mindset for us, ourselves, we who work here, everyone from a programmer on a games team to marketing to me to everyone, that we don't put limits on ourselves.
Exactly. And that's the spectrum I'm talking about, that there's something nebulous out there that we're not doing that will get us there, but we're actually doing it now. And there's very small tweaks in order to get there, and the evolution of Stellaris accessibility, CK accessibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've sold quite a few copies of Cities as well. So
one or two.
So on the other end, then, can you talk a little bit about the business philosophy of, or the mechanics of how we go about moving a game into legacy or sunsetting a game? How do we decide to stop?
Oh yeah, that's a pretty.
Is it strictly a business decision? Is it a
I would say it's a fairly emotional process, actually, because these games are like our babies.
Yeah.
So there is, the curve of acceptance, grievance and acceptance.
Exactly.
I think we go through that with every game. I think it often starts in a business. It starts by looking at how many people are actually playing the game, which is at the end of the day a business decision.
Of course.
So then that's where we really start seeing that, okay, this is not a game that is managing to keep the players involved. And then there can be reasons, and that's not a fixed amount of people.
No.
It really depends on what the game is. It depends on who the studio is. That can also be a reason, of course, that we're working with the studio who wants to move on to new things. So it's not necessarily a business decision as such, but there is always something that is involving either the players are not staying with the game, or the studio is very, very keen to move on to new things. In the second case, you can of course find another studio, but that's not always super easy to do. And then we go through this grievance curve. Because after all, it's something, it's blood, sweat, and tears that goes into this.
But I think we've also had a couple of experiences where it's been maybe a little bit humbling on learning and to understand how much stamina and endurance we need to have, as some of these games take time to grow, and we've seen them kind of do this.
And we do let them live on for a long time, even if the numbers aren't always that amazing. And we want to do that because even though it might be a smaller group playing a game, we know they enjoy it very much. So
but at the end of the day, I mean, it is the business component to it is very big, but it's not the only component.
Exactly.
And
I would say it normally starts in the business component, but then how it evolves and when it's done, that depends on a few other things as well.
And speaking of evolution, and on the other end, then we mentioned during not the last episode, but the episode before that regarding Crusader Kings 3, we discussed Game Pass.
Yeah.
You and I have a lot of discussions about being forward-leaning in the industry and future-proofing ourselves, and Game Pass is obviously one of those cutting-edge things that is making a lot of ripples. What's your early take on? I know that you've been very open about how interesting you find Game Pass. How do you find it developing now that we've tried out a case?
I continue to find it very interesting. I mean, it was super scary to put Crusader Kings on Game Pass, I have to be honest. We didn't know if that was going to affect sales on Steam. We didn't know if you guys were going to like it. We know that fans can be quite vocal around things. So there were a lot of things that went into considering this. Having released the game on both Steam and Game Pass, we see that it's almost been good on both sides. And of course, it's helped by the game getting amazing reviews. But it's also a fact that Game Pass allows people who maybe wouldn't have bought the game to go in and try it and test it. And we've had a lot of people who haven't really been in contact with Paradox before at all with any horror games trying out the game. And we're also seeing that people are playing the games for quite a long time. So it's not the case, because that's another thought or concern that I've had around subscription, that if you have very complex games, there's a risk that people will only go in and have a quick look, like you do on a TV show, for instance. If you don't like it, within 5 minutes, you move on to the next thing. And that would be very problematic with many of our games, considering the complexity of them, but so far we're seeing that people are playing the game on Game Pass as well.
It's a positive experience.
Yeah, it's a positive experience, and then of course longer term we'll see if it adds on a lot of complexity when we look at expansions and added content in general. It's a little bit early to say that, but my view, as you know, Shams, is that we have to participate in these different ways of getting our games out to players, whether it's through streaming or cloud gaming, or whether it's through a subscription service. So all of these things, we will continue to try them and test them and evaluate continuously.
So then you have a
positive view,
positive outlook on the future of Game Pass as well, outside of Paradox's.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think Microsoft have been extremely clear that they're investing a lot into this.
Yeah.
So it's not a short-term investment for them.
You're on Twitter.
Yes.
And you talk to.
I just changed my handle yesterday.
Oh yeah? Why?
Ebba PDX. Because I wanted it to be clear that first of all, it was a bit boring. The one. Not that this one is much more fun. Maybe I should change it again now. Thinking of it.
Really,
anyway, it's Ebba PDX. Baby steps.
But you were there, and I'm curious to hear what kind of not complaints, but what is the most common thing that people ping you about on a product level in our games?
Victoria 3.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No doubt. No, but it's lots of different things. It's ideas. It's around. It can be things around translations quite often. Like, why isn't the game available in this language or that language? And also a lot of positive comments. A lot of thank yous, and you guys are amazing, and thank you for bringing out great games.
Okay.
So it's I have to say, I mean, I know that Twitter can be a very hostile place, but that's not my
experience.
No, very little.
Well, let's see.
How it goes after this. Good luck to me.
Let's move on to one of the bigger topics, which has to do with M&A. For those of you that are not familiar with that, that's mergers and acquisitions, essentially buying companies or properties or anything else. It's obviously an area that is, very sensitive. Being a listed company, we can't be too public about these things. If we can touch upon some of the stuff, two of the questions that we got, both kind of start with Paradox has been very aggressive recently, and you've made a lot of acquisitions in the recent past. Before we dig into their actual questions, would you agree with that characterization?
I think a lot is. Well, I mean, we've made 2 acquisitions in a very short time period, but the reason for that is mainly its timings and how long it takes. It can take quite a while to go through a legal and financial process of just getting from agreeing that this is a good idea to actually doing the acquisition. So that was more of a timing thing than a.
Yeah, and how do you feel that we stack up compared to the average? There's a lot of consolidation happening in this industry.
Yeah, I actually think that we are. We look at a lot of companies and a lot of talent. But for us, it's very. We're a gaming company first and foremost. We want studios that we buy or IPs that we buy to fit with us. And when I say fit, of course, the game is very important, but also the culture of the bunch of people who comes with this. We want them to like being in the Paradox family.
Yeah, and that's one of the questions, like what special measures are we taking to make sure?
That's a big measure for us. Oh, what we do to make sure. We basically do a cultural audit, which sounds incredibly boring. But we ask them, what do you think is important in life? Do we think the same things are important? How hierarchical are you? How do you make decisions? How do you view recruitment, stuff like that. So it's quite down
and we're talking about the pre-process.
Yes, exactly.
Before we consider folks.
Yeah, exactly.
For partnership.
And then we continue to do it once they are on board. With
exactly.
So
company. The philosophy is basically not to proceed with these partnerships unless we are start at a fairly closer.
Yeah, and that also has to go both ways.
Yeah.
Both parties want. It's like a marriage, right? You have to like each other from both sides.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it's very hard to get it to work out longer term.
For sure, and but that also comes back to the philosophy that we have when we do buy studios. We have them fairly close to the company. We're not a holding company.
No, exactly. And it's and I come back to this thing that we're playing. The management team is playing Fall Guys or Crusader Kings or Stellaris or whatever. We do a lot of those things because it is what we work with. There's no right or wrong way of doing this. It's just that's the way that we have chosen to do it, to be a gaming company and to be very engaged in the products and very on top of the product, if you will, the games. And then I think the other part of this is that even we have this view that it needs to fit together culturally, but there also needs to be a high level of skill in what we buy, because even if we probably integrate a lot more than many of our peers, it's still a fact that the studios then they keep very much of their identity within so the Paradox umbrella, if you will, is there to support with things like a lot of admin stuff that maybe isn't the primary concern of a studio, but the studio is still responsible for making the games and working, of course, with the publishing side of things.
I mean, we'd spend a lot of time asking, what do you want to do?
Yeah, exactly.
And what
that's
do you
also
not
very
want
important.
to do?
Yeah, that's also a very important part. Like we don't really look at pure capacity to develop. It has to be, there has to be the passion to develop something as well.
Yeah. And it's also, at the end of the day, it's M&As can be very expensive, and if you screw up, it can end up being a very expensive mistake.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, we haven't actually discussed this, you and I, but what do you think about the ZeniMax purchase from Microsoft. Any kind of thoughts? Have you thought about that?
I think it's super exciting, and I think it's one of the signs that Microsoft is really investing in the new console version, but also in the subscription models, and everything that has to do with their platform and their network of both studios and gamers. So I think I mean it's a big price tag, but that's deservedly so with what they're getting for it. So I think it's and I'm not, I mean, not that I was expecting this specific M&A activity, but it doesn't surprise me as a
it makes a lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
You can see where it fitting
where the industry is, where Microsoft is, and also how they've upped their view on gaming in the company as a whole, and I think also for Bethesda and everyone there, it can be a great boost for them as well.
Because that would be my next question, is would you care to speculate on, I mean, the strategy on Microsoft side seems perfectly clear for everyone who's looking at what's happening. On the ZeniMax side, I find it, I've come back to this question many times on myself, trying to ask, why did they decide to sell? They've been on a long journey. They're arguably best in class in so many ways.
I don't know the financials of the company because I haven't studied it that closely, but I do think that, I mean, a lot of the studios who we work with, the cash flow, that like the way making a game works is that you spend 5 years making something that you don't know if you're going to get a good return on investment on until very close to release, right? So it's a very risky business. And I think from that perspective, this can be a way to, right now there is a lot of money in our system. We have you get a lot of contributions from Epic, for instance, or Game Pass for that matter. But I don't know, but it can be a security for them. Plus, I think it's also a really cool bunch of studios that they join. I mean, it's not like it's they're building up a really solid group of studios and games.
I agree. I think
what do you think?
No, I mean, I think that also we have to also look at where the industry is at. I'm only speculating here, but in many ways, we've said this before, is that we would like to be more future-proof, but in many ways we are pretty future-proof as well. Although we have a lot of premium games and subscription might be taking over, we don't know. But at the end of the day, a large part of our business is also in-game sales and DLC and value add in that way. And many of the games that Bethesda makes has been monolithic base games. So the question is if they saw maybe the difficulty in doing a transition, or realizing that Microsoft can really help us doing the transition as well.
And also subscription can of course be a bigger threat in that context.
My favorite new KPI is content velocity.
Oh, and I thought it was something like how often do you get kicked out of a Fall Guys?
No, unfortunately that's not one of my main KPIs. But I think that the content velocity that we have is pretty good. It could be better, but in Microsoft
we work with it a lot.
Microsoft is incredibly good at this. What we see with user-generated content and modding and what they're doing with Minecraft, and I think that that's something that perhaps was interesting for ZeniMax as well, to how to get that up. Let's take it back closer to Paradox and talk about we had a full episode about Crusader Kings 3 and the success there. I just want to hear your kind of take on what's the big takeaways on CK's success from you. How are you enforcing new demands, requirements when you work with people?
The biggest thing for me, and the most important thing is of course that the fans like it so much. That's like it's a
Do you think it'll change the trajectory for some of our other games?
Maybe, but I also think not all games will have a 91 Metacritic score, and that's fine.
That is fine.
That doesn't have to be the new bar. I mean, we joke about that it's the new bar, but actually it doesn't have to be the new bar. It depends on what the game is.
I think that was the question essentially. Are we going back to the drawing board and saying, well, okay, this happened?
No, not really. I mean, I think no, you have to find a balance there, because there's how much time and money you invest in building a game, and then there's like what's the output, and those two also have to match a little bit. Of course, we know that a game like Crusader Kings will also up the expectations from our players. So that's something we need to manage on our end. But that's the biggest part. But the internal thing that I think is so cool about it is that it opens up the mind to what's possible. And that's something that I mean, you can talk about it a lot and you can try to force it, but the best way of doing it is really when stuff like this happens, when we have a very successful game and not just, and it's, of course, you know, I think the success that I'm mainly happy about here is the reviews. Because that's what drives our teams internally. It's really, it's the fact that I saw one of the developers on the CK3 team. He wrote, I think it was on Twitter, he wrote that he's been, you know, for years he's been following developers on his favorite games and just in awe of these people, and now suddenly he is that person, and that to me is like that's amazing. That's it's magical, it's magical. So that's the best part. So I would say it doesn't change fundamentally. It doesn't change how we do things going forward. But of course, we want to repeat that feeling of love and success. I mean, at the end of the day, what we care about is the love from our players. And then, like, how do you measure love when you're into KPIs? That's a different thing. But that's like when you get that feeling, that's fantastic.
No, it's and I said this before. Like making money is great, but when a team puts in a tremendous amount of effort and it actually pays off, it's such a nice story in itself, and then the money's gravy on top of that, and
it kind of rubs off on the whole company, even though not everyone has worked on CK specifically. But you know, we're proud of each other and we're proud of each other's games, and that's also a very
and
cool
that's why
thing.
It's so fun to look at all the effort that's going into the titles that we're working on that haven't been announced, that are being developed in the US and different places. So it's really fun to see what's going to happen. Okay, continuing along the lines of Paradox and bringing it on a lighter note before we get to the really freaking dark note.
Oh, wow.
What does a normal day look like for you as a CEO?
Oh, you know what? It's changed a lot with the pandemic.
Okay.
Yeah, because normally, but maybe now that doesn't exist anymore, but what used to be normally, I travel so much.
Yes.
Like all the time, like pretty much almost every week. So that takes up a huge part of my time. I realize now that it just this whole like getting on and off a plane and going to the airport and a lot of quite social activities, really, just meeting with partners, but also meeting with all our staff and talking about where we're going as a company and being a bit more of almost like a what's galionsfigur in
figurehead.
English? A figurehead, a little bit like that. That's like it's a fairly large part of the deal, actually. And then, of course, the other side, which is more by myself or with the management team, is where we're going as a company. More trying to push this more long-term notion and not get stuck in where are we today and what are we working on today. Because you know, people are super busy, so it's very easy to be here and now. And it's important that we are a bit further ahead. I was going to say commander-in-chief, but definitely not. Your partner in crime, Daniel.
You hear that, Daniel? You just got promoted now.
Exactly. But I mean, so he's on paternity leave, right? Which is a very Swedish thing, which I love that we do. But that means that I'm currently sort of the CMO as well. Not really, because we don't really. Daniel is hard to replace, but that means I get to work much closer with the people who report to him for a couple of months, and it's quite fun because it's clear that I have a different view. I tend to have a broader view on things. Because I have access to all this information and I get information from everyone. Of course. So it's quite cool to be more involved in one department.
Yeah, because I was having lunch with Daniel the other week and he asked, so Ebba's looking into all the documents. I was like, yeah, you really let a fox into the hen house. But he's like, well, but it is what it is. Like, what are you going to do? Say no? So he's quite happy with that. No, but on a practical...
No, but so I mean... lots of meetings. That's really how I run my day. Meetings.
Let's get into like when do you get out of bed in the morning? How early? Like
I get out of bed at 6:45.
Okay.
I do yoga in the mornings now. That's so freaking annoying. I know. I hate people who say that stuff like that, but I do actually. But it's only like a 20-minute session.
Okay.
Then I have a little dog,
so
that requires a little bit of a morning walk. And then I either go to the office. Right now I go to the office like twice a week, 2 days a week. But I always start my days with checking all the numbers. That's the first thing I do.
F5.
So email. So I have like a blocked time in my calendar, 1 hour every morning, which is for urgent emails and checking numbers and asking questions.
What are the key numbers you kind of look
mainly how many people played the games the day before, and it's a bit tricky sometimes with when the data comes in. Monthly active users, or actually daily active users I look at. I also compare the games. I look at all sorts of things like sales, but not so much sales, more activity really. Any issues that there might be, stuff like that. And then I have a lot of meetings of all sorts, both external and internal. And I try to have a little bit of time at some point every week to think about something. But I don't really schedule that. It's more that it needs to happen at some point. To think about, and then usually it's something I need to think about that I absolutely don't think about. I think about something else. But more to just have some free time.
Usually, is there a highlight of the day?
I mean, I like looking at the numbers in the morning. That's how boring.
Well, because the numbers do look great. So usually they do.
No, but highlight. I really like our management meetings. Actually, we have once a week. We have a management meeting, 2 hours. Sounds
Fred
like
calls
a lot.
me every week during that meeting.
Yeah, and he should know because we haven't changed the time since he was the CEO.
But he used to call me during those meetings
okay,
as well.
fair enough. Yeah, that's a good point. No, but it's I like it. We have a really good group of people, and we spend very little time saying, this is what I did last week. It's much more about, okay, this is a problem I have. How do we solve it together? Or this is what my department has been working on. I want you to know about it and stuff like that.
Okay, cool. Let's go from that to the end of modern civilization, COVID. It's safe to say that you and I have slightly different philosophies when it comes to this. I'm a bit more of a nervous Nelly when it comes to this, a nervous Shams in this case. And I'm not going to say you're the, anti-vaxxer of COVID at Paradox, but I found it interesting that you've highlighted areas of concern that maybe I haven't. In terms of, it is hard. We ask the question all the time to our staff, like, how are you feeling, to make sure that we're tracking everyone's well-being and stuff. And but what are your long-term? Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Yeah.
But you're adamant about the drawbacks of being.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this. And when I say this, I mean working from home and not being in the office. I'm also not a big fan of COVID. That's another thing.
But I think it's important to underline that it's not because of the fact that there's a lack of production or anything.
No, let me expand.
It's a well-being thing.
We are lucky in so many ways with this. First of all, we have amazing teams who are doing fantastically well, I have to say, all things considered. We're also in an industry that hasn't really been that impacted by COVID. We've almost been positively impacted so far by it. But what I see is I don't think it's great for long-term creativity. I actually think it's terrible for long-term creativity. And it specifically is not meeting other people. And I know that we have a lot of people working with us who are more introverts than maybe you and I, Shams. Which I fully respect, and I understand that it can be quite taxing to go to the office every day. But we still miss out on so many things. We miss out on meeting people who aren't in your team. We miss out on meeting people by the coffee machine who you maybe didn't know from before, or just randomly talking to anyone. All those little things that actually drive creativity and drive the company forward. So that's one side of it. And the other side of it that I find equally problematic is the cultural side of it. How do you build a company culture when you never meet? I mean, we have some amazing people called the Safe and Sound Ambassadors who are doing a fantastic job at really trying to keep spirits up. But it's still hard when you never see each other to build these things. So we are not going to be the type of company who are going to be working from home forever. We are following all governmental guidelines and everything, but as soon as it opens up, we will try to go back to the office. Doesn't mean it will be exactly the way it was before. We have a lot of departments that have been working from home every now and then. As I said myself, I'm traveling all the time. You travel all the time. But we also have departments or people who work with very heavy equipment or huge screens or other artist related things. So we need to figure out a way for everyone to be able to work from home every now and then. But I think it's very important for us, both as a business, but as a cultural entity and as a group of people who actually like to hang out with each other, to find a middle way there.
Yeah, I mean, any growing company has a challenge with finding the right people. How do you perceive that COVID is impacting this?
We haven't really seen any bad things from that. I mean, we have people. We just had, for instance, we had one woman joining us from China the other day. She's been in. It's taken a long time for her to both get out of China and get into Sweden. But it's in general recruitment. But it actually, let me rephrase that. In parts of the company, recruitment has been fine. In parts of the company, recruitment has been very hard. We see on the West Coast, U.S. West Coast, it's been quite tricky with the recruitment. So it depends a little bit on where you are.
Understood. So continuing the conversation about the size and growth of Paradox, there's an interesting question that has popped up in the past, but I think it's worthwhile to post it again. Is there an end state optimal size for Paradox when we're a perfect diamond in terms of business size or number of employees? Does it make sense for Paradox to grow to EA size or bigger? Are there other scenarios you're considering?
Oh, wow, that's a really difficult question.
Yeah, it is.
I would say no. Because it's something that evolves always. And it evolves both in the sense that we grow in who we are, so we can become something else. We can become bigger or we can become more spread geographically, because that's also a big change for us in the past couple of years, that we're in 6 countries. It's a lot of different time zones to keep in your mind and figure out how to work. For instance, we have monthly news every month for everyone in the company, and that's something that used to be based on Swedish time, and now it's based on that as many people as possible should be able to tune in live, and then of course we record it so you can watch it whenever you want. But that puts a lot of strain on a more, shall we say, small but still global company. So all of those things need to move together, and I think that I think we can be much bigger, but we want to be much bigger and still keep the familiarity in the company. I mean, for me, that's super important.
I mean, at least in terms of growth of staff, it's a means to an end. It's not an end in itself, right?
No, absolutely not. No. To me, you know what? The sign of growth for me is how many people play our games. That's the growth measure that is relevant.
And that's where it's really impressive, where a company like Supercell has 200 employees who manage to have stupid amounts of players. Yeah. It's very impressive. Okay, cool. To kind of wrap up, a couple of other questions that are very topical in the industry that I wanted to touch upon. Our position on crunch, if we can touch upon that. We also recently entered into a collective bargaining agreement that we have at Paradox. What do you see, what benefits do you see from having the unions in your workplace?
A lot of benefits. Well, I mean, I see a lot of benefits in having active employees in general.
People who care about what's happening.
People who care about what's happening in the company, and people who care about what's happening in the industry and how it affects us. And I think the size we're at now, the unions, and when I say the unions, I don't mean the central unions in the country. I mean our local union teams. Chapters, exactly. Who are very, very, very strong believers and supporters in Paradox and want what's best for Paradox.
They're truly passionate about making it a better place to work at.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
do you feel that there's an adversarial kind of discussion? Because I know you meet with them all often and discuss about different things, high and low, and it's
I mean, it's
because people have a lot of different views of what a union means and a big corporation.
So first of all, I should specify that now we're talking about Sweden.
Yeah.
And in Sweden, unions are very normal in Sweden.
Yeah,
it's not a crazy thing. So whether you have a collective bargaining agreement or not, you have way over 50% of the people in the company being part of a union.
Anyway,
so for us, we've always had lots of unionized people in the company, and we have in our other countries as well. So that's not a specific thing for Sweden. And that's not any, and it's not even anything that's discussed because it's so normal. So you can go to any Swedish company and that would be the case. And then the collective bargaining agreement, that's I think now it makes sense because we're way bigger and it's a more organized way of seeking employee feedback. Having said that, we seek employee feedback through other ways as well. First of all, of course, by talking to people and meeting. But we also have this, we do like a monthly survey, for instance, to make sure we catch everything. Because it's also important to catch sentiments all over the world.
Sure.
Because even though the head office is in Sweden, we are responsible for not just what happens in Sweden, but what happens in all of our offices and studios.
Right.
So, it's a balance between the two. But there was something, you mentioned something in the
crunch
beginning.
Over time.
That was like one of the first things also when I joined this industry, that it's something, it's a combination of funny and sad that we have our own word for overtime.
Yeah. No, crazy overtime. Yeah.
We've always been, I have to say, extremely good at not crunching.
Yeah, but we've deliberately put it part of our strategy.
It's been a very big part of our plan. It's something that we've been driving for. And I know I spoke to Johan Andersson about this a while ago. And in the early days of Paradox, it was a problem. But for many years, it has been something we've worked actively against. I think we have people in the company who work overtime every now and then. And I'm not a huge fan of it. We think that work-life balance, the famous expression, is very key and crucial. And I think this for myself as well.
Yeah.
I mean, my job is maybe a bit more here and there. I mean, I probably answer emails always, but it's still not something that I drive for. And it's just like I also go to the dentist during my, I have a very fluid boundaries between private life and work life, but that's not for everyone. Many people don't like that, so I think it's important that one can choose.
And it's I'm quite proud of the fact that most of the CK team had a long standard July vacation as every year. The question does pop up, and we can round off the podcast today with it, is experiences as being a CEO as a woman. There are not many of you in the games industry. We end up working with a few of them. Marina Hallikainen at Colossal Order, Brenda Romero. We have friends with Debbie Beswick over at Team 17, Tanya Fox at Kit Fox. There are not any experiences there.
There are actually quite a few in Sweden as well, in some of the indie studios.
Anna Norvik, who used to be an alumni of Paradox. Any advice, any experiences you want to share? That perspective is a question that pops up.
I don't think I have any advice for women specifically. I think when you go into a leadership position on this level, you have to have a combination of knowing when you made a mistake and also being nice to yourself. Because if you, and you have to be able to make decisions. So the basis, you have to be able to make decisions. Some of those decisions are not going to be good. Some are going to be bad. And if you beat yourself up about it endlessly, I think mentally it's going to be very, very tough.
It's also a blocker for growth.
So one has to find the balance between the two. And then I have always found that having someone, it doesn't have to be your manager, it can be someone else who you can ask for advice or who promotes you. That's very important, because the higher up you go, the less positive feedback you get, if I'm a little bit harsh, and that's fine. But most people, I think, need that from someone to not become, and it can be your partner, or it can be a colleague, or it can be a coach. It can be a lot of different people. But I do think it's important to have that from someone somewhere. Yeah, I mean, we can maybe at some point do a thing on leadership in general, but I've done this for such a long time now. I've been a manager and a leader for 20 years.
Something years.
Jesus, I'm so old also. Jesus. Anyway, but I think it's you have to be able to make decisions in a world that constantly moves and you don't have all the facts.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
That's probably the hardest part of the job.
Okay.
The rest is all fun and games.
Okay, thank you, Ebba.
Thank you.
It's fun to do a little bit of a deep dive. On one hand, a lot of these things are stuff that you and I talk about all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I think it's important still we know that we have a fair bit of listeners who are people in the company, but more and more we also know that a lot of people who end up working here tomorrow are listening today. To give a good perspective of what the culture is like and what set expectations, I think it's good to have these conversations from time to time. Happy to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cool.
See you soon.
Take care, everyone. Stay safe, play some games, and have a good time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.